For those of you not familiar with the American Center for Mobility, we were opened in 2017, initially as a connected and autonomous vehicle test bed, formed through a public-private partnership with the state of Michigan, a number of auto OEMs, tier ones, and other companies from the mobility ecosystem. Our tagline used to be connected, automated, validated, and we've repositioned ourselves onto safe, sustainable, and secure. To date myself, I started my career at this facility in 1997 as an intern at General Motors. It used to be General Motors Powertrain, if you're familiar with powertrain, transmission engineering, and the Willow Run hydromatic plant that was there. It's now been converted into this testing facility with a test track, and then now we're expanding into different areas beyond ADAS testing, into EV interoperability and charging testing, hydrogen, cybersecurity, and other areas. What we do goes beyond just renting a track for people to use. We're actually involved in a number of different areas, and I think people are sometimes surprised to find how they can engage with an American Center for Mobility. In the technology development space, you can certainly rent our facility, or you can actually use your equipment at our facility to showcase it for customers who are using the facility for testing purposes. We do a considerable amount of research at the federal level. And then some companies just come to physically use our property for marketing purposes alone, to showcase their technologies like you're doing here, to incorporate them into the test environments and to raise awareness about their offerings broadly to our customer base. We are a nonprofit, so we are a neutral third-party convener, which allows us to do a number of advisory activities, convene industry around topics. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then we have real estate and education and workforce development activities we do through a separate 501c3 nonprofit that we have. So a lot of different ways you can engage with ACM. In addition to the track, we have garages, laboratory spaces for vehicles, spaces for meetings and events. And in fact, one of the most in-demand areas we have, even throughout COVID, was the garages, because you need a place to do work and you need a physical track and test environment to do vehicle work. We've also been converting these, as you'll see later, into EV testing spaces. But one of the things I wanted to highlight today is that as you pull in our facility, there's a very large remnant of the GM plant that was there, which is a 90 megawatt substation. And that is property of ACM. And ever since I've joined ACM, I've been eyeing this infrastructure and its potential applications in high power testing, electric vehicle testing, other applications from hydrogen production on into data analytics. So what we provide people basically is infrastructure that you don't have to replicate yourself, a very expensive test track, garages and laboratory spaces, and then to actually go and find this type of grid capacity anywhere else would be very difficult. So we've been looking at how do we take this infrastructure and then position that against safe, sustainable, and secure mobility. So one thing that we had heard from a number of customers who came to our facility was that to test for things like interoperability, or to actually test an EV against chargers, you often actually have to drive to a major metropolitan area. So leave the state of Michigan, go down to Washington, D.C. or some other area, find a diversity of chargers, plug in, and test them. There used to be a purpose of the drive itself was to evaluate the vehicles and the experience from getting from point A to point B. But when you have such a proliferation of new EV models and EV chargers, and that you have over-the-air software updates or software-defined vehicles that can continuously be updated in the development process, as well as be updated once in the field, interoperabilities start to become a major pain point. And particularly, how do you test and validate for interoperability issues? One OEM told us that they've been working on interoperability for the past decade, and they believe they'll be working on interoperability for the next decade. And so, having a place that people can test for interoperability issues was one key pain point. Staying abreast of the standards and how to interpret them. Some of the standards that were just mentioned, the ISO standards, are fairly in-depth. That there's very few people that understand them fully. That there was not enough test locations and that there was not enough testing that was happening. And so we went for about the last 18 months and talked to a number of OEMs, and we got a resounding confirmation that this was a pain point for them. Similarly, they needed access or more local access to testing. So here in Michigan, all the OEMs and tier 1s located here don't have a place that they can go to test against a number of EV chargers other than to drive around and find them. The key issue, obviously, being to test the communications handshake that happens between the electric vehicle and the charger. And then to get access to all of the new charging stations, availability of the software updates, and notification when those things were available so that they could come back and test against. Similarly, we had a number of different areas over time that people wanted to have access to testing capabilities, namely plug-in charge, V2G, bidirectional, as it was mentioned, megawatt charging systems, and then eventually into things like microgrids, and have access to be able to test at full power, because as I mentioned, getting access to grid infrastructure has been difficult. And so we heard resoundingly from pretty much every OEM we talked to that we don't want to build this ourselves. We don't want to invest in a test bed with a lot of different chargers. But if you were able to build something, we would come to use that test facility, and it would be ideal if it could be centrally located where we could collaborate with the EVSEs to solve on issues of interoperability. So our proposed solution to this was to put together what we're calling our EV charging Basecamp, which is a EV charging interoperability test bed located in southeastern Michigan, in Ypsilanti at the Willow Run facility, and basically take our connected and autonomous vehicle test track and then leverage some of that electrical infrastructure to start providing laboratory space and test environments for EV charging. Our goal is to be able to provide a diversity of level 2, level 3 chargers with an emphasis on getting up to 150 kW plus and NEVI compliant chargers, but have it all in one location. Provide you access to the test equipment that you can use to then test EVs relative to charging stations, and then provide you the engineering services across the spectrum. I already mentioned a plug-in charge, V2G, testing the EV to vehicle handshake, and then all the way into higher power charging systems. Another aspect that we're planning to provide through this test bed is what we're calling an interoperability clearinghouse, which is comprised of 2 key components. The first one is a data management and analytics platform, which we can use to anonymize, annotate, aggregate, analyze testing across a broad spectrum of customers. And then a second related piece to that is on remote testing, and something yet to be developed where, in addition to our physical test environment, can we introduce kind of software validation in the cloud against a variety of vehicle software packages and a variety of electric vehicle charging stations without having to have the physical testing. Still under development. And then kind of a wrapper around all of this, is, being a neutral third-party nonprofit, is our ability to convene. And so our plan was to have a pre-competitive EV charging advisory council, not to compete with the standard-setting bodies that were mentioned earlier, but to actually guide the activities of the lab. So those companies that are participating in our lab would also have a say in trying to direct what we should be thinking about doing next. Of the 4 points of interoperability, I often get a lot of comments on the first, which is the connector, but really our key focus here is on number 2, which is the interoperability or the handshake that's between the electric vehicle and the charger. Over time, we're planning to get into vehicle-to-grid testing and then eventually, potentially into payments and OCPP. The operating model for this test bed is intended to be somewhat collaborative between the EVSEs and CPOs who are going to participate in the lab, the OEMs who come to test, and then ACM as somewhat of a neutral arbiter to help execute the testing. And so we're basically looking for charging station companies to provide us a mixture of hardware, level 2, level 3 chargers, to give us notifications when there are software updates so that we can notify the auto companies that charger A has been updated, and then the ability to version or toggle back and forth between different versions of software. We're not sure how to do this yet, but what we've heard from autos is sometimes they want to test the latest and sometimes they want to go backwards to test against a prior version. The OEMs, in turn, are going to come use the test facility to test for interoperability issues, and we're looking for a two-way communication back to the charging station companies when there is an issue. Can we connect the two together so that they can work collaboratively to solve it? ACM in the middle, then, is a test bed. People can come rent it, self-serve, come in and do their own work, or they can engage us to provide the equipment, the engineering services, run full-service programs. And as I mentioned, then beneath this would be a pre-competitive advisory council that would be, guiding the activities of this test lab. So we had actually been looking at this for, the better part of 2 years in terms of market exploration, and had decided to lean forward with our own first phase, taking advantage of the electrical that we already had at ACM. We penned a partnership with Charin, who was looking for partnering test labs. You heard earlier on about the testivals that they run around the country. And so last fall, we signed an agreement with Charin. We started to execute participation agreements with a number of electric vehicle equipment supply companies and CPOs. And we went through and, verified the interest of a number of OEMs. And so we had leaned forward on that last fall. And then just 2 weeks ago, we had received notification from the new Joint Office for Energy and Transportation, which is the U.S. DOT and DOE office, that a proposal that we had put into them to bolster this effort was accepted or conditionally accepted. So we have a lot of wind in our sails, and this was actually a very timely event for us to be at because on the heels of that, we're really pushing forward to build out a full-scale capacity EV charging and interoperability test bed. I will preface it that it's still under negotiation, probably about 60 to 90 days away, but that you bring together ACM's test abilities, Charin's network, and then the support of the federal government to launch a much bigger initiative. This has been our kind of phased evolution in terms of how we think about developing this test facility. We've been working, as I mentioned, on kind of market assessment since 2022. Based on that, we kicked off a phase one effort on our own last fall. We just received the notification of the Joint Office Award to expand capacity of the test bed. And so those are the main things that we're focused on today. But based on industry interest and as well as funding sources, whether it be grant or investment through ACM, in the future looking at things like V2G bidirectional testing and megawatt charging systems. In fact, in the case of megawatt charging systems, we may actually be able to accommodate companies today based on the infrastructure we have. Where we plan to do this in our first phase was just to take some of the existing garage spaces that we had, repurpose them for EV charging laboratory space. We've identified one of those as our EV charging Basecamp, but each of these garages has 480 volt connections, 208 volt connections, the ability to have chargers inside or outside, and then the ability to locate a number of chargers along the existing garage outdoor space. And so our assessment said we had enough to get started to do an EV interoperability test bed. The majority of people testing said they don't need high power to start, so we said we have enough connections and enough power to get going. And then some of the investments we plan to make will be staged in over time to boost the power capacity to support full power testing. So 6 bays there. Most of the chargers we have are going to be skid mounted. You can move them around. We can schedule time in a particular garage for people to do testing. The second phase of the build out, which we were hoping would be funded through the grant that we just received, and was to take that garage space and actually go build a purpose-designed outdoor test space similar to, if anybody's been to Daimler Truck's Electric Island out on the West Coast. These are pictures of their test bed, but similarly where we could have a place to bring in light-duty vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles in a configurable environment. They designed this to be configurable where they can drop in different charging stations pretty readily, and to have ours weather-protected outdoor and centralized their space. So we're in the process of developing our own renderings for this, but the concept was similar. Do a electric island type concept, and then design it such that Charin could host their testivals at ACM. I think in 2024, they're continuing down the road of doing their testivals around the country, and they may continue to do so, but we're trying to provide them a home base starting in 2025 where people don't have to go all over the country. They can just come do the testivals here at one location in Michigan. So the testbed capabilities are still being updated. This is kind of a living document because we continue to get more commitments into the lab. But as it stands today, we have a handful of level 2s that we already owned, a total of about 9 that will be coming from vendors with current agreements, 3 DC fast chargers, about 8 more planned that are coming in through contributions from EVSEs, and then 1 extreme fast charger. It's a 350 kilowatt charger. And then on the equipment side, we're planning to have an AC/DC emulator or a system similar to the ones that you're seeing out here with Vector. Obviously, we would love to have Vector as part of the lab. Potentially based on interest man in the middle, as well as other PLC sniffers or listening tools. And then providing the engineering services, which could be, us running full programs for you or just simply providing access to the space. Hardware has started to arrive. That's always a good indication that we're on the right track. I mentioned that we had leaned forward last year and had already started to pen agreements with various EVSEs. So these are the first 3 units to arrive for the test bed, all from Autel, all skid mounted in a way that we would like to have other chargers, with the ability to move them around the test facility. So if an OEM comes in and says, I want to schedule these 3 or 4 different chargers, we'll put them into a particular test space for them. They can have access to those chargers as needed. We also have a number of, I would say, 5 to 7 other EVSEs who have committed, but we can't say their names quite yet. So just a little bit around the engagement model, and maybe less attention to the words on here. I'll just kind of hit the high points. But a lot of people have been asking, how do they get engaged? And we're out there trying to drive engagement right now. So if you're on the equipment side of things, whether you're a charging station company, a CPO, CMS provider, we are generally following a contribution model where companies are contributing the hardware to the lab, either via a donation or a loan, so that hardware is available. And what they get in exchange for that is access to information. How are their chargers performing is the key give back there. And then the test bed users, the OEMs largely, we're looking for them to use the lab as they would any other commercial lab, perform their testing as they would through ACM, either self-service or full service, and then provide some information back, basic data back, so that we can inform the EVSEs. But basically, 2 different models of engagement. One is contributing hardware to be part of the test bed. The other one is using the test facility and accessing that hardware. And we've developed agreements, and we're test fitting those right now to see whether those can, streamlined enough for widespread use. But so far on the equipment side, I think we've made it very easy, very low risk, turnkey for somebody to kind of get into the lab and make their hardware available. And so the key focus areas, largely driven by the grant that we received, are to start supporting ISO 15118 with plug-in charge, 70121 OCPP, as well as having representation of CCS and J3400 connectors either on each charger or a diversity of chargers. And then we're exploring whether we can also get into to NIST 44 testing, other testing that requires accredited certifications to perform them in the lab. And so I think one of the key things, and in fact probably the most important thing that needs to come out of this effort is data. It's both an important element of our effort, it's also a very sensitive aspect to our effort. And because we're getting contributions from companies who are giving us equipment to use, we'd like to be able to provide back information. Was the charger used? By whom? When? Did it charge? Some basic level of information. At the same time, we don't want to be airing people's dirty laundry if a charger didn't work or a vehicle didn't work and making that information public. So as a basic level, we're trying to get a commitment from the car companies that use the facility to be willing to share some level of information. In support of our federal grant, we're being required to share some level of information on test case development and conformance to be submitted back to ChargeX, if anybody here is involved in ChargeX. But that is where the joint office would like to see the output of our grant provided. And then on the advanced analytics side, on our interoperability clearinghouse, we are going to be developing a more robust data management analytic platform with intelligence. That's in partnership with IBM and a company called Turbine. And the goal there would be to automate the process of annotating, anonymizing, aggregating, analyzing, and developing insights from a broader set of data that we get at the test facility. And then ultimately trying to get to a clearinghouse where we can do software-to-software validation via the cloud. That would be kind of an evolution. We've been hearing from a lot of the charging station companies a desire to have that capability, but it will take a little bit longer to get out in front of that. And then we also want to maintain a physical test presence because we've also heard that you can't just test the software, you actually have to test chargers at high power in the right environment. So the blend of those two things. And just the last piece here that kind of, we actually see a lot of interest in this. I think some people are what I'll call committed out. They don't want to be involved in more committees because they're already subscribed to too many different committees and councils. But one thing that we have done at ACM, and not just with the EV charging, but with our broader business, is we provide an industry advisory board or councils for those who are heavy users of our facility or who have invested in our facility to be able to see what we're doing and to help guide what we're doing. So to more actively tell us what they need from a facility and then guide us in terms of how they would like to see things evolved. So that way when we make our investments, they can be aligned to the needs of industry. And so as part of this whole effort, we're standing up an EV charging advisory council. The intention is for it to be a pre-competitive council subject to whatever safe harbor guidelines we need to follow, similar to like a U.S. car might do. And to have the participating EVSEs, CPOs, equipment providers, and OEMs who are heavy users of the lab convene around the topics of interoperability, help us define the requirements we need from a data management perspective, how they would like to manage those things, and then help us define the evolution of the test capabilities in the lab. There is a little element of building a bridge while we walk on it here, but I'll just say that up front, is that when we leaned forward on this, we didn't have all the answers to all the questions in terms of how we were going to do this. And so we decided to use this advisory council to help us be a compass, so to speak, as we built out the capabilities of the lab. We would incorporate that guidance real time, provide reassurances that the people using the lab would be heard. So, we've been working on this for the better part of 2 years. There's still a lot of discovery that has to happen as we get moving with this effort. But we're at that critical mass now where the hardware is starting to arrive. We're going to be engaging the OEMs heavily this next quarter. And hopefully in the next 90 days with this federal grant, we're going to be off and running with a kickoff to this test bed. So with that, I will conclude. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to field a few.